Hi, this is Executive Lions Living Life on Purpose, and I'm Matt Wilson. And this is a show about successful people who also live a life of purpose. So the goal is for you to hear their stories, to be encouraged, to realize that they face struggles just like you, but they've been able to overcome those. And often they talk about how their faith has played a role in that. So today we're sitting down with Barry Moore, and Barry is a family man. He is a father. He's a husband. He is a follower of Christ. He's a businessman, and then he's also a state legislator. So, obviously a lot of great things going on that we're going to try to talk about today. You're definitely going to want to hear his story. But Barry, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, definitely, you are a person who's got a lot of different things going on, and give us a little bit of a background. I know that you've got a long history. Been in the military, starting a small business. Roughly 20 plus years ago. Give us a little bit about your background and tell us how you got to the point that you're at today.
Yeah, I grew up kind of on a farm in Enterprise, Alabama, and went to college and got a degree, sold pharmaceuticals for a few years, and came back and just basically founded a small business. And I was the garbage truck driver, so I started it from scratch from day one and drove the garbage truck. And to this day, I still have my CDLs because sometimes I have to drive a truck. But through that process, the Lord just began to bless us. And 2006, the Republican Party asked me to run for the House, and I told them no at the time. The Lord didn't give me a green light. They came back again in 2008 and said, would you please consider running, because you're a small business owner, no political experience whatsoever. And so we got in the race in 2010 and became a part of that first Republican majority to be elected. So it was an honor to be a part of that class, and it was a great honor to serve, and has been a great honor to serve.
That's awesome. And I think that it's important for people to realize that sometimes we've got things that we want to pursue or don't want to pursue, and sometimes God will either tell us yes or no. And as we were talking about just a second ago, we've got the same disorder that Mike Pence was diagnosed with, because God definitely still speaks today. So from that standpoint, you're running this successful business. You are just enjoying life, mm-hmm. And now you've got friends that say, "Hey, run for this," and then ultimately God gives you that green light. Tell us about your experience in state politics and the good, the bad, the ugly.
Well, the exactly right. They had asked us to run, and I was clearing some land actually on an excavator. And God gives us promises throughout life, and He'll give you verses. And mine was Psalms 121, and I was just clearing land that day, and I felt like I got a green light. God had called me to step into the state legislative race, and so called Heather at home, my wife, and she was doing a Bible study, and she said, Barry, I was at my Bible study today, and it's on such and such date. It's Psalms 121. That's the verse. She said, I think maybe that's God putting the word to what you're feeling in your spirit. And so we stepped into the race and got elected. And through that process, I just always voted my convictions. In addition to going through that process and voting your convictions and not playing special interest games, I got a bullseye put pretty square on me. And they decided in 2000, about 12, that they were going to start working on trying to take us out. And so by 2014, I was an indicted elected official, facing 40 years in prison, and just not sure what the Lord was doing, and not sure if I hadn't missed Him altogether. Mm-hmm. And through that process of being drawn into that courtroom and having to go through there, and I've taught Sunday school half my life was, mm-hmm. but I didn't know God like I got to know Him through those few weeks, mm-hmm. and months, and since then the process has been quite remarkable. So He put us in the politics in that area, and I was like, Lord, are you sure? I mean, I was kind of like Moses, are you sure you got the right guy for this? Right. But He will call us, and He will equip us. Mm-hmm. And often we tend to think we've done it on our own. We really are capable of nothing without His grace, His mercy, and His strength. And so as we talk about the trial in that process, I'll be happy to tell you how God transformed me on October the 29th, 2014, and what that has led to today. So interesting life so far.
Yeah. Well, obviously that had to be an extremely difficult time, and I've faced adversity, and I've had situations where 2015 was a year for me that I dealt with personal things, family things. There were some health issues, some business issues. And through all of that, my spiritual mentor, he said, you cannot do this on your own. And I had to rely on God because there was no way possible I was going to be able to get through those things if I tried to carry all that weight. And thankfully, I turned to him, and, it ended up being the best year of my life spiritually until 2016 and 2017. That relationship continues to grow and strengthen. But, we can either humble ourselves or he'll humble us. And, so unfortunately, we have to find that out the hard way, which one we need sometimes.
That's exactly right.
I know I needed the hard way. And I'm thankful for everything that I walked through. But when you're facing 40 years in prison, that's not a pleasant thing to be dealing with. I know it had to take a toll on your family, your business life, every aspect, certainly your political career. So, kind of walk us through that time and what exactly that looked like.
Initially, it was just a perjury indictment, and the idea, I think, was at the time to get me to roll over or to tell them something that they were investigating other people. I didn't know anything, and so we were going through that process. And as I was going through this, I was in a campaign as well. So I was indicted just prior to a primary. And my election was actually the trial was actually the week before my election. So there was a lot of political things going on. So my family was in the middle of running a campaign. I had a daughter as her senior year, and I was facing 40 years in prison under indictment. And so, but they put it in the mailbox every other day. They had me in handcuffs. They had me in a jumpsuit in a lineup. And not once was I ever in handcuffs or was I ever in a lineup, but it was in my mailbox every other day. And so what happened was, through that process, they just began to apply a lot of pressure for me to drop out of the race. And I told my son, I got off a call from my attorney one day, off a phone call, and he said, Barry, he said, they're going to indict us. They're going to arrest us. And he says, my attorney told me on the phone, a man who's paid and supposed to know what we're supposed to do, said, and he's a good friend of mine, he said, Barry, you may have to drop out of your race. I hung up the phone and I walked over to my carport, and my 12-year-old son, Jeb, was sitting in the carport, and I said, buddy, I said, if we don't drop out of this race, I said, they're going to destroy us politically. They're going to destroy us personally. And they're going to destroy us financially. And he said, Dad, he said, I've been studying the book of Daniel. He said, and when all those other people bowed, he said, there was a few men that stood. And he said, I think we need to stand. And I turned to my wife and I said, I guess I'm going to let a 12-year-old boy tell me what to do. And the Bible says that those men went into that furnace and came out without even the smell of smoke. And we went through that trial, and I can tell you, the night the jury had recessed, and it was October the 29th of 2014, and I was in a hotel room in Lee County, Alabama, and I was asleep, and God woke me up, and he said, get up and go pray. And I went over and got on my knees. There was another bed in the hotel room. It was 2 queen beds, and the wife and I were in this one, so I went over and got on my knees, and God was nowhere to be found. And so it was confusing. So I went up, got up, went back to bed, and a few hours later, he woke me again. He said, Barry, get up and go pray. And I went over there, and I got on my knees, and he was nowhere. We just been praying to the ceiling. It would have been the same difference. I went back, got in bed. I could not understand what was going on. And so the next morning, I'm in the shower, and the Lord and I had that conversation that he would not have with me the night before. And he said, I'm going to teach you that obedience is greater than sacrifice. He said, I got you out of the bed last night. And I just want to see if you'd be obedient. Even when you didn't think I was there, when you thought I was nowhere to be found and I didn't even care about the outcome of the process, were you going to be obedient when I called you? And so we had that conversation in the shower, and he told me, he said, this is not your tearing down. This is your bringing up. 3 days in the belly of the whale. Remember Jonah and Paul on the road to Damascus. And so I got out of the shower and I dried off, and I went in there and I told Heather, I said, honey, I don't know what's going to happen today. I said, but God's got our back. And she looked at me and said, well, I hope it's not a prison ministry. And that's just your wife. She's just going to home me. She said, well, I hope it's not a prison ministry. So as I turn and walk to the bed, there's the 2 double beds I told you about, or the 2 queen beds. My phone is laying there and it's charging. And there's a fella that played defensive end at Auburn by the name of Randy Hart. I didn't know Randy Hart from Adam. Never had a conversation with him. And at the time, he was texting me the same thing God was telling me in the shower. And so I text Randy. I said, I'm going to need a prayer friend after this. I said, God's doing something great. I don't know what it is. I said, but I'm going to need you in my life from this day forward. And so we went over to the courthouse and went up to the 2nd floor, and the jury had been deliberating. And so I was waiting to find out what the future held for my family and for myself. And we're standing there on the second floor, my wife and my mom and I see a man looking at me across the balcony over the way, and he begins to make his way through the crowd to us. And he walked up to me, and he looked me straight in the eyes. He said, "My name's Joshua." And he said, "I'm here to tell you to do what God's called you to do." And he said, "Can I pray with your family?" Now, I don't know what Joshua prayed that day because I was in shock. But he prayed with us, and he went on his way, and I'd never seen Joshua before. And we went into that courtroom, and we got that not guilty verdict. But through the night, the Lord told me, he gave me Psalms 37, and he said, "I want you to read Psalms 37, 5 and 6. The minute you get the verdict, whether you're guilty or not guilty," he said, "I want you to read." And so when they put the cameras in my face and it was not guilty, I had it on my phone because I want to be obedient. I knew then that God and I had met him in a way that I hadn't known him, not personally, and through that powerful process. And I read Psalms 37, 5 and 6, and it began a process in my life that it was always about obedience. And the refiner fire is hot, and if we're stiff-necked, it takes some pretty good heat sometime. And what had happened is we had let pride creep in. I'd let my own, and that happens to, I think the number one thing that man has to struggle against is pride. Who is on the throne in our life? And the ego thing is either you're going to edge God out completely, or you're going to just trust him. There's no two in-betweens. And so we have to work, and it's a constant battle for us, And so for the next 2 weeks, guys, and I can't explain it. I'm Southern Baptist. So what I tell you, and my guys and my handlers all the time, the political guys are like, "Man, you can't say that. You sound like a preacher." But I'm like, you know what? I'm just telling the truth. I'm just telling what happened to me. So through that process, it was a life-changing experience. And for the next 2 weeks, the Lord woke me up at 3:47 in the morning. I don't know why he did that. But he would take me around the house to pray, and he told me, he said, "The steps of a righteous man are ordered by the Lord, and obedience is greater than sacrifice." And so it was that process of just trying to be obedient. And once I got to know, and this is where I realized, you hear in your life that a lot of times that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But it's not a fear like he's going to get on to us if we mess up. It was that knowing how holy he was and how unholy I was. That's where wisdom really began to intervene into my heart and my life.
That's definitely a powerful story. And, again, some people are going to think it's weird. Some people are going to think it's, we're both crazy.
I think it's a little weird. I got to tell you, that's strange stuff.
Right. But, when you've had an experience like that, there's no doubting the presence and the power and just, the fact that God is not only extremely real, but he wants a relationship with every single one of us. And, I've had those encounters, and, I grew up in church, my whole life until I went to college, then I got away from him. And, but it was 2015 that I really started to pursue him, and then he started to pursue me. And, but it wasn't until 2016 that I first heard from the Lord. But I do agree that, when he calls us to do something, that you better do it. And, he's going to get you there one way or the other.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And so, when you feel led to do something, sometimes we want to wait on this, we want to wait on that. But ultimately, we've just got to start. And then he'll guide us the rest of the way. But, I also think that, sometimes we, in business especially, or in a position of power, you get the ego and you get the pride and you think, well, I've accomplished this. I've done all these things. You start to read your press clippings. You start to pat yourself on the back, and you really believe that somehow whatever level of success that you've achieved has been based on your own merit. And he can pull that all right out from underneath you. Now, the enemy can certainly keep you propped up for a long time because, if you're on the path where it's glitz, it's glamour, it's as much money as possible, then he's got you right where he wants you. He's got you distracted, and you don't even have any hint that God wants a role in your life. But, if God's trying to draw you back to him, sometimes it takes a fall in order to get you back to where he wants you to be. And, so I can definitely relate, and I, have been through that fire, and that's what we talk about with, a lot of the guests on this show is, the things that we've got to walk through. As long as we don't keep those things to ourselves and we share our testimony, without tests, there is no testimony.
That's right.
So, the greater the trial, the greater the circumstance, the greater we've got the opportunity to give him the glory through all that we go through. So you make it through that, and your family was, you obviously were very relieved. Your family had to be very relieved. I think that was probably a prophetic word by, your son. But after that, what's it been like since then? Because now, you were a politician that faced charges like that.
Mm-hmm.
And now, God has called you again to run for a higher office. You're still in office currently, but you're called to an even higher office. And so, those things are going to come at you again. And, again, you are addressing it head on.
Sure.
But what are the challenges in running for office with that, kind of hanging over your head a little bit?
Well, I think the fascinating thing was that I had term limited myself. I even in the famous, recorded phone calls of 2013 where I said I wasn't running again, I had already term limited myself. And I thought that God is done with me in politics, and thank goodness, because it was never anything that I just desired to do. I was willing to do, but it wasn't something I sought out. And so August 2015, I get a call to meet a guy by the name of Donald Trump. He's running for president of the United States. And I had a scheduled meeting the next day with then Governor Scott Walker. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'll meet with President Trump, at the time candidate Trump. And, less than 1% chance of him getting the nomination. And so I'm in a bus going to Mobile, and I get to talking, and we get thinking about it. And we decided, my wife and I prayed in that bus that morning back there in that hallway, God, what are we to do? What are we to do? And I felt, and I'm not this smart, but I felt the need to endorse Donald Trump that morning. And so I became the first elected official in the nation to endorse then candidate Donald Trump. And a lot of people, friends of mine, said, man, have you lost your mind? And I said, guys, this is where I need to be. And so I was on a stage in Atlanta People's Stadium, endorsed him, didn't think anything about it. And I'm rolling along. I've been at 2 of his events, and I'm a Trump delegate. I'm going to try to help him get elected because I wanted somebody kind of outside the Beltway. And through that process, my congresswoman at the time, 20 days out, Access Hollywood dropped that dime on then the nominee. Mm-hmm. And she pulled her support. Some of the guys from the Trump camp called me that night and said, Barry, you need to consider running. And I said, guys, I'm done with politics. I said, I will help y'all. We need to win this race. But I said, I don't have any desire. I said, and I'm going to need to pray about that one. Mm-hmm. And so it was through that process that I tell you that I could not make up my mind what I needed to do, and I was laying in the bed, and it was November the 11th, shortly after the election, 10th or 11th. It was late at night, way past my bedtime. And I was fussing with God. You ever fuss with God, Wes? I was fussing with God. I'm like, Lord, are you sure? Why am I so miserable if I'm right where you want me to be? Mm-hmm. And
many of those conversations.
Yeah, the plan was I was going to come back, run my business, go fishing. I was going to live my life. Mm-hmm. And I got a message on Messenger. I don't know what it is with God and Messenger, but a girl I had not talked to since 1988, lived in California, was a Vanderbilt engineering grad, texted me and said, you're in this for a reason. She said, God's going to use it. And she said, we're doing an intercessory prayer for the Trump transition team. Would you like to join that phone call? Now, God had gone quiet. Mm-hmm. I was still studying the Bible and I was seeking him. But after that 2 weeks of going around my house praying, I hadn't heard from him. Mm-hmm. I just was miserable. I guess I'd kind of drifted off and I couldn't get his attention. And she hit me with that. I joined that prayer call, and at that time, the Lord began to just revisit me, and we began to conversate again about things that he wanted me to do and what he was calling me to do. And so I had about made up my mind that I was going to do this prayer call, and we were going to do this, and the Lord was working on me, and he was changing my life, and I could see that this obedience, a greater than sacrifice thing, was going to be a common thread in my life. Mm-hmm. And I was called to go to the inauguration on the 18th of January. And my wife and I flew to D.C. And it's going to really freak you out. I'm Southern Baptist. This is going to mess you up, too. Mm-hmm. I know you go to Church of Highland, but this is going to really get your attention. So I'm in an airplane flying to D.C., my wife and I, and they do a prayer call that night. Well, I'm not privy to be on that call because I'm airborne. And so we get to Washington, D.C., and this lady that had invited me to join this prayer call said, we did a prayer call last night. She said, the soul of D.C. is going to be on your feet, she says. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. You'll bring some of that back to Alabama with you. But, here's the but. You're going to step into this world of prophecy while you're in D.C. Now, I'm Southern Baptist, man. I've been teaching church. Sunday school half my life. I didn't know what that meant. And so I told my wife, I said, Heather, I don't know what's going on, but they're saying something about a swirl of prophecy in D.C. And so, you know, Heather and I walked around D.C. for the inauguration looking for a burning bush because we didn't know what what's the Lord up to.
Right.
And so, you guys, it's the truth. We went to the inauguration the morning of the 21st of January. I walked down to the hotel lobby to eat breakfast while Heather's getting ready. We're going to fly back to Alabama. And I walk into a restaurant down there, and there's a lady seating people. And I said, ma'am, I said, could you put me where I can charge my phone? I said, the battery's a little low. So she takes me around behind a little petition wall, and I plug my phone in, and I set it there on the table. And one table over is an elderly black couple. Mm-hmm. And we struck up a little conversation. They'd come in from Detroit, Michigan. And we began to talk. And immediately, I don't know, it was 2 minutes into the conversation, they began to prophesy. Mm-hmm. And so I recorded all 10 minutes and 37 seconds of that prophecy. And that was another way that I just knew that the Lord was in this thing. I didn't know what he was up to, but he was going to transform our nation, and he was going to begin to move in young folks and Christian people, and he was going to start to do things. And so this was all kind of foreign to me. But I came back and I began to just share my testimony. And honestly, the Lord began to work. And one of the things the prophet told me to do was to begin to journal, and so I did. And this was a part of that process. And so that's how I remember so many of these dates and so many things. But what he has done in my life, and it's all about humility. It's all about a bent knee. And I tell you, man, Psalms 119, 105 says he's a lamp unto my feet. And so all I can do is take that next step. Now, I don't want to go to Congress. I shouldn't say that. I'm willing to go. But he has totally gotten me to a point that all that matters in this life is doing what he's called me to do. And so we go through this process and we walk in obedience, and he has blessed us. He's blessed us through the campaign. He's blessed us. And so he told me to read the book of Joshua, and I put that in my journal 3 times. In the side of my journal, I wrote Joshua, Joshua, Joshua. And a few months later, a friend of mine walked in the door and he said, Barry, have you read the book of Joshua? And I said, yeah, Bill. Funny, God told me to start reading that about 3 weeks ago, just before you got here. And he said, the priest, the water didn't depart in the Jordan until them boys stepped in. He said, you got to step into this race. And so we stepped into that race, and we have been blessed beyond what is understandable. But I just want to be where he wants me to be. And it upsets my wife sometimes because I say, honey, he called us to run. He didn't call us to win. And she said, well, I don't like to hear that. But I just know we're right where we're supposed to be. And so that's that thing of just walking. And when you know he's in charge, the results is his responsibility. They're not ours anymore. And so that's a great place to be in life. And that peace that passes all understanding, if you're right where you need to be, man, he can work through that. And so that's kind of been my experiences in 2015 and 2016. So.
Well, number one, that doesn't freak me out at all because I've experienced prophetic events, and I've had prophecies spoken over me, and some of the things that are going on in my life have been prophesied as far back as 2011. And, so I certainly, again, believe that, God still speaks today, and he can speak through, anybody that is willing to be that vessel. And, I think that another interesting thing is, so I'm reading the One Year Bible, and, we started in Joshua yesterday, but I'm one day behind on the Old Testament, so I actually started the book of Joshua this morning. So, it's important to remember that, Moses, as faithful as he was and as obedient as he was to God, he did not ever get to see the promised land because he struck the rock instead of speaking to the rock. And Joshua was the one who led him to the promised land. And so with that, it's, number one, I'm thankful for Jesus because, we're not under the old law. He came to fulfill the law. But, if a person as wise and as, just obedient as Moses, one mistake would keep him out of the promised land. It would have been so difficult for us to ever accomplish anything. I don't have any cattle or any type of livestock to make those sacrifices that it would have taken before, the sacrifice and the resurrection of Jesus. But, so going back to prophecy, there were numerous prophecies about Donald Trump being the next president of the United States. And so my wife showed me some of those, and there's a prophetic community here in Birmingham, and several of her friends had said that, they were, feeling that God was speaking to them, and Donald Trump was going to be the next president. And that went back as far as, him being a part of that field of 17.
Sure.
So
and that was one of the comforting things to me through the processes. I felt like that there were people and family members that I knew that were praying and seeking the Lord, and they said the Lord's hand's on him. And so even during the darkest of times, I took comfort in knowing that God's had already prophesied and that he was leading in that direction. And so, and like I said, for a candidate, it's kind of strange to come out and say these things. But, the one thing that Joshua told me in the courthouse on the second floor, he said, you're going to be a messenger to men. And so through this campaign process, I've been able to share this testimony and to churches, like I said, I'll be speaking at, and I can make it apolitical, but the testimony doesn't change. And so it's hard to separate the who you are from the what you are.
Right.
If you're doing it right, if you're living life the way you are too. So.
Well, and that's the thing with this series. When we first started it, the goal is to highlight successful people that also live a life of purpose. But some of the folks want to get very involved in their testimony, and some people would tell me that I'm jeopardizing my business because I speak so much about my faith and I share so much. Whether it's in person or social media or through these videos, but God has only blessed the business. The business has grown. I mean, there have been new clients, there's been new opportunities, doors that only he could open.
Sure.
And so I just want to tell anybody out there that it is, trying to wrestle between being a business person and being a follower of Christ. You don't have to choose. You can be both. And with that, he will bless it if he's called you to do something and you're obedient. I mean, he can do so much more with a little than you can do with everything that you have. So don't ever think that, what society is telling you, you've got to follow the world's ways, because his ways are right and true. And, I'm living proof of that, and you're walking that out yourself.
And the most comforting thing to me is you're talking about Moses striking the rock instead of speaking. Abraham's his obedience was counted as righteousness as well. So a lot of times, even when we're walking now, and we're under grace, obviously, but when we're walking, sometimes, I worry. I said, Lord, did I miss you here? Did I miss you there? But at the end of the day, I always say, God, will you please count my obedience as righteousness, my willingness to follow you, that faith step that I'm taking. If I do miss you, count that towards righteousness.
Right.
And he will. He'll bless things far beyond. And I think that you find that. And it's the same with the political world. A lot of these guys, especially the handlers in the congressional race, they don't want you to talk about your faith. But there are so many people in that crowd that I have told that story to, that have walked up to me with tears in their eyes and said, the same sort of thing happened to me, or this happened to me. And so, man, this life's a vapor. This is a vapor. And so at the end of the day, what are we doing to impact eternity? And God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. If he was speaking to people in the Old Testament, when he speaks to us in the New Testament, just because society doesn't understand it doesn't mean he's not God.
Right.
And he's not still doing the same things. And so it was a realization for me. Like I said, man, I'm Southern Baptist. I grew up, I was a drum playing deacon in a Baptist church. And so that was strange for me to wrap my head around that God actually speaks through people, and that he will speak to you if you will get to a point of brokenness and repent. Man, he will reach out and touch you. And when he touches you, there ain't no doubt it's him. Because that's what a friend of mine asked me at lunch today, Barry, how did you know that was God that woke you up? I said, believe me, there was no doubt in my mind. That was never in question. I knew who it was when he called my name to get up out of bed. I knew who it was. There was no doubt that it was the creator of the universe.
Well, and the interesting thing is, too, once you have those encounters, then you look at, back prior to, and you realize that he's been trying to get your attention for a while, and you just weren't aware of the things that he was doing or the way that he was orchestrating your life. And, and that just, reminds you of how slow you were before. You just weren't smart enough to realize that he was there the whole time.
And if you ever if you ever get a hold to him a minute and you have that interaction with him, you desperately seek that again. And that's what I found is helps me with temptation. And when Satan comes on over my shoulder and wants to tempt me, I have to understand that that's not me. That's a spiritual battle going on that we might not perceive. And so one of the things you're talking about where he sends signals, he sends signs, he sends things. The book, the movie, I Can Only Imagine. Right now, I love the fact that the fella had imagine on one page of his journal and imagine on the top of it, because that's exactly how God works. He lays that roadmap out for us. And then when the time comes, you'll look back and see. And that's exactly what happened. He had imagined in that journal so many different times, but when God said write the song, the words were there, and he did it in just a few minutes. And that's our life. That's a tapestry of our life. God paints those steps, and he documents and he connects those dots. And then you look back and go, man, his hand was there the whole time. I just don't know why I was questioning him. I don't know why I was wondering, because he was there and he loved me far beyond I could ever imagine, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely so true. And this has been fantastic. And, unfortunately, we're out of time for today. But, Barry, thank you so much for being here.
Thank y'all for having me.
And I know that this is going to bless some of our viewers, and it's blessed me. And, so please, if you want to, if you were moved or touched by this video, please share it, like it. We certainly want you to go and check out other videos as well, www.executivelion.com. We also want you to go to Living Life on Purpose on Facebook, like and share that. We really appreciate you watching today and hope you have a great day.